Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Alright, tonight's episode of Twisted Tales, I'm going to talk about a biker named Yves Trudeau. A Canadian biker, contract killer, former Hells Angel, and turned informant. So we'll touch base on all of this and all its crazy chaos. So Mr. Trudeau, born February 4th, 1946. He was a native to Quebec soil. Charged with 43 counts of manslaughter and a few for sexual assault. Trudeau was actually in a few allegiances. The Popeyes MC, which he ran from 1968 to 1977, and the Hells Angels from 1977 to 85. He was actually in the North chapter in Label, Quebec. He quickly rose through the ranks to become the club's leading assassin, a major participant in multiple biker conflicts throughout the Canadian history, and a couple examples being the Popeye Devils Disciples War and the First Bikers War. Trudeau quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the club's leading assassin and major participant in multiple biker conflicts throughout Canadian history. A couple examples being the Popeye Devils Disciples War and the First Bikers War. Trudeau's early life was actually riddled with abuse by his military father, and in the 1960s he worked with explosives, which later proved to be a dangerous technique during his murderous periods, which actually nicknamed him the Mad Bomber because he was so highly skilled with explosive devices. Just a quick example here, in 1977 and 78, three members of the Hells Angels, Yves the Boss Bateau, Pierre Mathau, and Trudeau, actually murdered Donald McLean, a member of the Outlaws MC, and his girlfriend Carmen. They're actually killed by an explosive device that was attached to his bike. So, it just shows how ruthless he was, right? Yves ended up being the first Canadian to receive the Hells Angels' Filthy Few title. The title designated to those willing to kill for the club. So about 2 years later, back in 79, Trudeau began the Label chapter, which started what was to be known as the Hells Angels Graveyard, the northern part of St. Lawrence River, that because of Trudeau's influence and killing sprees, ended up becoming a major dumping site for Montreal's prevailing gangs. So, being as dangerous as they are, the club's got to have rules. The Hells Angels actually had 3 international rules. I'll give them to you as follow. 1, no rape. 2, no drugs by injection. And 3, no swindling. Trudeau's Label chapter often rode, a thin line between these rules. So his members were actually known for their violence, excessive drug use, and that started eating up the gang's profits. So now, those wars that we talked about, I'm going to fire off the Satan's Choice Popeyes War. Now, this will be the first major outlaw motorcycle club conflict in Canadian history. This conflict involves the country's 2 largest motorcycle clubs, Satan's Choice from Ontario and Popeyes from Quebec. This conflict lasted from 1974 until 1976 as they battled for dominance in the country. I'll give you a little prelude here. So, the conflict would actually set stage for the First Bikers War, which involved Satan's Choice and the Popeyes MC, Canada's largest biker clubs at the time, engaging one another. So support for the conflict was divided between the Hells Angels and the Outlaws as they backed their respective allies and prepared for the North expansion. This expansion would actually give biker Trudeau time to establish himself during the conflict as one of Canada's most dangerous criminals. Back in 74, members Cecil Kirby and Garnet Mother McEwen. McEwen was actually the president of Satan's Choice, St. Catharines chapter. They traveled to Fort Lauderdale, Florida to meet up with the senior members of the Outlaws. McEwen became close with the Outlaws, becoming a vocal advocate within Satan's Choice for closer ties with the American club. Satan's Choice leader Bernie Gwindon formed an alliance with the Outlaws in June 1975. The Outlaws became exclusive distributors in the U.S. of PCP, methamphetamines, and they were just mainly manufactured by the Satan's Choice in Northern Ontario, Canada. They called their meth Canadian Blue, which could be sold for $8,000 per pound in Canada, but the United States saw a significant sale price that could be up to $12,000 a pound. Distributing meth would be a very wide money-making scheme for these guys. They had to do it in lakes or forest areas just so they wouldn't get caught by police. Because meth, when it's cooking, actually gives off a smell almost like cat urine. Another MC called the Outlaws, they actually controlled markets in the Midwest. They became dependent upon the methamphetamine being manufactured by Satan's Choice. In turn, they made them a strong ally. Satan's Choice gained access to larger supply networks of clubs, which opened up a whole new bunch of business opportunities to the club, also bringing more reinforcements in the event of a club war. So with the Outlaws gaining a stronger ally in Ontario, this precluded any expansion by the Hells Angels into that region. Eventually, the Outlaws gained a way to challenge the supremacy of the Hells Angels in Quebec through the Montreal chapter of Satan's Choice. This led the Montreal chapter and their allies, the Devil's Disciples, into an open conflict with the Hells Angels in 1974. This little move led the Hells Angels to start planning for an expansion north, and had begun scouting the Popeyes MC. The Popeyes were regarded to be the most violent biker club in Quebec, being notorious for engaging in gratuitous and sadistic violence, which is a big part of the reason they'd later be chosen by the Hells Angels for recruitment, and that being the most violent MC in Montreal. Another MC, Satan's Choice, they wanted to expand it to Quebec. It actually began in 1967 and established them into Montreal, and they aligned with the rivals of the Popeyes and the Devil's Disciples. This move caused tension with the Popeyes MC, who believed Quebec was their territory at the peak in the 70s. Satan's Choice membership reached 400, with 13 chapters in Ontario and Quebec, beginning the second largest MC in the world, behind only the Hells Angels. The Popeyes MC, being at its peak, had about 350 members with 7 chapters in Quebec. Longtime rivals of the Popeyes, the Devil's Disciples, they had aligned themselves with the Montreal chapter of Satan's Choice. They engaged in the manufacturing and smuggling of chemical narcotics in Montreal, a market that the Popeyes MC decided to violently enter back in 1974. This led the Popeyes to go after the Devil's Disciples member, Howard Pigpen Barry, an enforcer of Satan's Choice. They opened fire on the Popeyes clubhouse with a sawn-off Lee Enfield .303 bolt-action rifle with a 10-round clip. Multiple brawls and assaults occurred between the two gangs, resulting in injuries on both sides. As the conflict started heating up, other organizations of the province would be pulled in. The Irish-Canadian West End gang would enter the Satan's Choice sides, and the Dubois Brothers gang backed up the Popeyes. So Yves Trudeau, the ace assassin, he rose to prominence during this ordeal, killing several. This led the conflict to be extremely heated up. Other organizations of the province would be pulled in. The Irish-Canadian West End gang would enter the Satan's Choice side, and the Dubois brothers, they would back the Popeyes. The Popeyes acted as muscle for the Dubois brothers, because they feared a full-on onslaught would occur from the Satan's Choice chapters in Ontario. They mainly targeted the Devil's Disciples, killing 15 members of the club between 1974 and 1976. 4 members of the Popeyes dying as well. These wars caused the Devil's Disciples to disband in January of 76. This war brought many casualties, and it caught the eye to local law enforcement, so they cracked down on both groups. This led to the destruction of the Devil's Disciples and the arrest of the Dubois brothers, eventually ending the whole entire conflict. So the aftermath of all these onslaughts, Satan's Choice managed to gain territory with their brute force, damaging the Popeyes MC raids in Ontario that actually dealt blows to the club, mainly the Devil's Disciples, and they actually disbanded in 76 after heavy casualties lost to their MC. This left the Popeyes earning their rights to distribute narcotics in Montreal territory until the Dubois brothers were arrested at the club, and then they were cut off from its largest supplier of drugs. These two clubs' weakened status enabled them to entry into the Hells Angels and the Outlaws MC. December 5th, 1977. Trudeau would become a founding member of the Hells Angels Quebec chapter after the Popeyes had a patch over. On February 1978, an incident occurred at the popular bar, the Brazier Joey, when 2 outlaws decided to drink until they were ejected by the Angels. This caused the two drunk bikers to be outside, highly intoxicated, and screaming obscenities at the Angels. After they stood outside for a while, a green car actually traveled down the street and briefly stopped. The driver eventually took fire, the driver being none other than Trudeau, that killed one and wounded the other. This little incident would actually spark a biker war between the Angels and the Outlaws, and that would last until 1984. In September 1979, the Hells Angels national presidents, Yves Batu, hope I said that right, they broke up the Hells Angels Montreal chapter into a northern chapter, being based in the city of Laval, and they opened up a south chapter in the Sorel, Tracy. So the reasoning for the breakup upon the chapter into two groups was because the Montreal chapter had too many members, making the clubhouse overcrowded. Trudeau was actually assigned to the north chapters, becoming well known for violence and reckless behavior, and also drug use. Other Hells Angels soon regarded the northern chapter as too wild and uncontrollable. They were skimming drug profits that were meant for other chapters and using drugs instead of selling them. So eventually all this would head off the Lennoxville massacre. So the northern chapter's gratuitous aggression frequently ended up with them being arrested for minor offenses, in turn putting the entire Quebec chapter at risk. Carroll actually learned that Trudeau, instead of using the money to actually fund his MC, he was actually using it to support his cocaine addiction. So as the Halifax charter was actually poorer than the northern chapter, he found Trudeau's behavior to be very crass. This move caused Carroll to go to Montreal to meet with Lessard. He actually demanded action be taken against the northern chapter. So Lessard needed a little bit more encouragement from Carroll. So they spent most of the meeting talking about the northern chapter, and which they deemed the northern chapter to be a menace to the existence of the Hells Angels in Quebec. Another member joined that group, George Beauboy Ballou. He was actually the Angels' president of the Sherbrooke chapter, who agreed with Lessard and Carroll that the northern chapter had to be dealt with. In March 1985, there was a secret meeting in Sorel. The Montreal North chapter was declared to be in bad standings with the Hells Angels, and they wanted them killed. So the plan devised by Lessard, Carroll, and Below called for 2 members of the North chapter to be forced into retirement, 2 other members to be given a chance to join the club's South chapter, and they wanted the rest of them killed. The main 2 members that Lessard and Carroll wanted dead were Viau and Trudeau. So Sergeant-at-Arms Robert T. Major Richard of the South chapter, he announced that they wanted to have a party to be held at the Sherbrooke chapter clubhouse on Saturday, March 23rd, to be attended by the Sorel, Label, Halifax, and Sherbrooke chapters, which all these were Angels chapters in the Eastern Canada. 4 chapters based out of BC, British Columbia, did not attend the party. Lessard had planned to ambush the North chapter as they entered the clubhouse, but the plan eventually failed because most of the targets failed to show up. Lessard had to extend the party for a second day and made the party mandatory for club members to show up. Most of the North chapter showed up the next day, except for Trudeau, who was actually in drug rehabilitation, and Michael Jinx Genest, who was actually in the hospital recovering from a failed assassin attempt by the Outlaws' MC. So a guy named Val and 4 other North chapter members were actually executed. Jean-Guy Brutus Giffron, Jean-Pierre, and Guy Louis Shop Adam. They attended the gathering, and the members were actually ambushed as soon as they arrived. Lessard, with 41 men under his command, forced them into the center of the room of the clubhouse, and they began to shoot them. Every member was shot dead. 3 other members of the North chapter that were in attendance at that party, they weren't attacked. Their names were Gilles Lenez Lachance, Richard Burt Mayrand, and Yvonne Lepierre Belladou. So they were ordered to remove the bodies and wash away the blood. Lessard then told Maynard and Belladou that he was not fond of them, and he was going to give them the option to retire from organized crime permanently or be killed. So while Lachance was offering membership in the South chapter, and he accepted. So together with Jacques Lapel Pelletier and Robert Snake Tremblay of the South chapter, Lachance went to see Genest to inform him that he could either join the South chapter or be killed, so he chose the former. So, to confirm his loyalty to the new order, Genest killed Claude Coco Roy, a prospect with the Northern chapter who was considered to be close to the murdered men. He then handed over to the South chapter 5 bags of cocaine that Roy had with him. Over the next few days, He then handed over to the South chapter 5 bags of cocaine that he had with him. Over the next few days, the Label Clubhouse was looted of all the money and all the drugs stored in it, together with 6 Harley-Davidson motorcycles that went missing. Despite the original plan to kill Trudeau at the Sherbrooke clubhouse, he was then contacted in a rehab and told that he had been expelled from the Angels. But he could rejoin if he killed 3 people who Lesser wanted dead. One of these people was Jeanette Legemonte Henry, the accountant to the North Chapter, and Thau's girlfriend. After his release from the treatment center, Trudeau discovered that the Hells Angels had taken his motorcycle and $46,000 in cash that belonged to him. They said they would return the bike if he killed 2 people for the gang. Trudeau succeeded in killing one of the targets, Jean-Marc Deniger. He was killed May 1985 and was stuffed into his car. Satisfied, the Hells Angels gave Trudeau his motorcycle back. Trudeau knew he was living on borrowed time, however. The Hells Angels had taken out a $50,000 contract on his head, and he decided to become a police informant and a government witness. So in 1985, Trudeau pleaded guilty to 43 counts of manslaughter, meaning that, as far as the Crown is concerned, Trudeau did not intentionally kill his 43 victims, 29 of whom died from firearms, 10 from bombs, 3 from being beaten to death, and 1 from strangulation. Police estimated 30 to 35 of his victims were other motorcycle gang members or sympathizers. Trudeau also testified on 40 other murders and 15 attempted murders. As part of his controversial contract with the government, Trudeau was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 7 years. Under his deal, the government also gave him $40,000 over the next 4 years and about $35 a week for cigarettes. After his release from prison in 1994, Trudeau was given a new name under a new identity, Dennis Cote. He resettled in the Valleyfield area of Quebec, lived with a woman who did not know his past, and he worked as an orderly in a nursing home, also driving a bus for the handicapped. However, after being laid off in 2000s, he slipped back into cocaine addiction and sexually assaulted a 13-year-old boy after plying him with wine and beer. So, for which he pleaded guilty for in 2004, he was sentenced to a 4-year prison term. Quebec Court Judge Michael Duceppe noted, "In your lifetime, you have killed more people than a Canadian military in the Gulf War." Trudeau returned to prison under the double stigma of being both an informant and a child molester, meaning that he had to be kept in isolation for 23 hours a day. In 2006, Trudeau was actually diagnosed with bone marrow cancer, so in July 2008, the Canadian National Parole Board granted him parole and ordered him to be released to an outside medical care facility. As part of his release, Trudeau was not allowed to contact minors or the victims of his crimes. The sister of one of Trudeau's victims opposed to him being granted parole. They told the Journal de Montreal that killing him was like buying a bag of milk. A guy like that doesn't have a soul, and that cancer is actually justice. And with that, folks, my little episode of Twisted Tales will be done for the day. Sorry I haven't been on much. I've been working and I've been sick, so just trying to get everything done. And, thanks for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys have yourself a wonderful day.
Twisted Tales.